Welcome to Nerdology, where we dive into the science behind consumer behavior, sensory research, and the latest hot topics in behavioral science. Quick insights, expert reviews, and conference highlights, all in bite-sized form. Let's get nerdy. Hi, everyone. And today I thought it would be fun to present to you the presentation that myself, with co-authors Richard Popper of P&K and Rachel Czapla of RIWI, did at the Pangborn 2025 meeting in Philadelphia about comparing implicit and explicit measures. I thought I'd share that. And basically, so that you get a chance to see it in case you weren't able to see it on site in Philadelphia when we presented it. And also give a chance to open up for more questions about the research that we did. So basically, it was titled Unpacking Consumer Perceptions. Do implicit and explicit measures tell the same story? And this really stemmed from over the years, Richard and I having lots of back and forth conversations about whether implicit and or explicit methods really tell us something different from each other, or if they're just two different ways of asking the same thing. So really just getting the same information from two different types of questions or surveys. And after years of going back and forth with this, we really just decided, you know what, it's time to test it. And this is something that really needs to be done because there aren't any validation papers in academic research around implicit and around the implicit association test, specifically as it's currently being used in consumer research. There's lots of studies out there in academia about the fully academic implicit association test, but the traditional academic IAT is really quite different from the one that's being used in consumer research and industry. But because most of those are done by agencies with proprietary approaches, methodologies, algorithms, whatever it might be, there isn't really any validation out there to really prove that they're doing what they say they're doing. And so we thought we'd at least take a stab at this. So we partnered, Richard and I partnered with Rachel Czapla at RIWI because RIWI has their own internal IAT platform that they use as a mobile way of testing. It can just be added to studies and surveys and research that's already being done as sort of something people can like plug in and enter into and exit back into whatever survey they might be doing. Also, I had a hand in designing that as it stems from the original HCD platform for implicit that a lot of people are familiar with. So RIWI did take on some formal HCD people and also incorporated in the HCD approach into their own IAT method. So there's a lot of similarities there. So I felt comfortable working with Rachel because it was a platform that was more familiar to me. Now there are differences in this approach from ones that exist from other vendors, but it's similar enough that I think that we can sort of get an idea. Okay, so we certainly aren't the first to explore sort of this concept entirely. But for example, Joanne Hort's team at Massey did compare CATA with an implicit, specifically looking at emotional profiling of food, looking at, in particular, plant-based food products. And they did find that both CATA and implicit methodologies were consistent and they were also correlated, but CATA tended to show, and by CATA I mean check all that apply, showed better product discrimination, while the implicit approaches did offer slightly better sensitivity for plant-based alternatives. Similarly, L'Oreal, when working with Curion, presented some work at TMRE in 2023 using a study where they found that both methods, CATA and implicit, gave useful insights into satisfaction drivers, but again, the explicit did seem to provide clear product differentiation. And it's interesting here because I think a lot of times implicit has been sold as a way to get better differentiation because it is tapping into these implicit or system one or non-conscious sort of thoughts that people would be having. But that does not seem to be the case. And, these studies that were done previously in conjunction with some of the conversation that was happening at last year's SSP meeting, where Holly Miller emphasized how tricky emotion in particular is to measure. And she suggested, much like the researchers at Massey, that maybe implicit tools could offer a better read on emotional congruence than self-report alone. So Richard and I thought this would be an interesting idea to kind of dive into a little bit, to find, are we seeing differences in discrimination between types of words? There seems to be some suggestion in this literature that I'm talking about now that that could be the case, but there's no clear study that has shown exactly what implicit might be measuring that is different from explicit methodologies like CATA or check all that apply, or maybe from scaled CATA or scaled questions about specific words. So again, if you're not familiar with implicit association, I recommend going back to some presentations that I've done and I've had on here. On YouTube or whatever it might be about what the implicit association test is and how it's being used in consumer research. But so if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out at me and we can discuss it more. But I'm going to dive right into what we studied. So to run the study and partnering with RIWI and their implicit research platform, we looked at how in particular, using RIWI, we were able to track not just reaction time, but also look at the time and social pressure that is part of their design of the implicit. So it's not just looking at the speed of response, but there's also a sort of social pressure that you get that comes, that is also a core part of the academic IAT. So it's not just people answering a question, measuring how long it takes them, what the latency is, but it's creating a forced choice condition, which is something that is needed for true implicit measurement. So we ran this study on the perception of three different lip products: matte lipstick, lip gloss, and lip balm. We ran this with 100 participants per three different survey methods, so 300 altogether. We looked at CATA or check all that apply. We also looked at rating, so they had scaled CATA, for example, and we looked at the implicit association platform with RIWI. These methods assessed the agreement of three types of product attributes. So we looked at functional attributes or functional words, emotional words, and descriptive words. We also measured liking and frequency of use, and we do plan to dive deeper into that data for more understanding in future talks. But for today, we'll just cover the highlights of some of the main findings. But we will be sharing more results soon in upcoming talks and publications. So do stay tuned to see that maybe in 2026 with Eurosense or SSP. So here you can see some of the first results that we had for the implicit for emotional words with a score based on reaction time, where you can see here that higher scores mean stronger associations and shorter reaction time. So we just did the flip inverse of that to get that implicit score. So how long it took people to agree that the attribute was a match for that product type. So the negative words at the end here on the right sign, like annoyed and boring, are clearly less associated, but only statistically differentiated findings among the products were for sexy and playful. So very specific type of words there, with glossy being maybe more so than the others. So there is some thinking that you could do about why that might be. Maybe because words like sexy and playful are a little more amorphous in people's minds, or maybe they are more emotionally driven, or maybe it's that lip gloss in particular is more of an emotionally driven. So we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into those things. So what we see here, we wanted to know, are these methods tapping into different cognitive strategies, or are they just different ways of asking the same questions? And what you can see here on this slide is more statistical differentiation among the products, lipstick, gloss, and balm with the explicit measures. So very similar to what we saw in the previous research that was done by Massey and by L'Oreal. On the top side here, you can see the CATA percent responses, and the ratings have the top two blocks. So those are the two top graphs that you can see. The lower graph is that implicit that we were just looking on the previous slide. So what does this all mean? Well, I think first it means we confirmed previous findings. Explicit measures are more discriminating. There are fewer significant differences for implicit. However, does that mean that the explicit is better simply because it has more significant differences? Not necessarily, right? What we are seeing here is that there are two styles of method, explicit and implicit, and grouping the explicit CATA and the ratings together do show different results from the implicit. So there are differences between the two segments of methods, implicit versus explicit. But are they related to cognitive approach, meaning how the consumers are thinking when they make their decisions in their answers? Are we revealing different information by the type of methodology that we choose? And the answer is maybe. So let's dive a little bit more into that. Now, we'd first hypothesize that if product perceptions are in fact shaped differently by intuitive, meaning system one, and reflective or system two thinking, so implicit or explicit thinking, then we expect the responses from the IAT to diverge from those of the CATA. And expect even greater differences where you have even more explicit effort with the ratings. So, given the increased cognitive deliberation involved in ratings, right? So, what you are seeing here are the correlations between the methods or among the methods, focusing on here the emotional words, really for the sake of time and as focus, rather than having, kind of like an eye chart of all the different words, types of words. So focusing on these emotional words, we thought that we would take a look at the correlations, but also we thought that the emotional words would have the most divergent for implicit, as we discussed from the previous research, that maybe implicit is just doing a better job with emotional type of words that are perhaps more challenging for participants to access, right? So what did we find? Well, across all three products, the matte, gloss, and balm, IAT scores correlate only moderately with either the CATA or the ratings. So in a way, our first hypothesis was in fact confirmed. They do diverge. There is a difference between when you group the system one or the implicit with the system two or the explicit. So CATA also and ratings are more highly correlated with each other. So they could possibly, as we would have predicted, they could be using a similar cognitive strategy. So ratings and CATA are similar and both are a bit more different from the IAT. But does this mean that the methods are getting at different styles of thinking? Certainly, participants are using different strategies to give their responses, and we can certainly see that in the explicit methods, which are more similar to each other. It's the implicit that is actually different from the two. So it does support that idea that these are two different styles of thinking. Now, we also hypothesized that emotional words like confident or sexy would show up more strongly in the IAT, while descriptive words like sticky or smooth would be more prominent in the explicit measures like CATA and the ratings. What we actually found was that the explicit methods shown in the darker blue were, sorry, in the both the blues, the darker and lighter blue, were more differentiating overall, whether it was emotional, functional, or descriptive words. In general, the explicit methods were more differentiating. Implicit results are on the green black line there, the darker line, and they were much flatter. So, as predicted, descriptive words showed up more in explicit responses. So, this actually supports the idea that they reflect more conscious, reflective evaluations. But we didn't see stronger emotional differentiation in the implicit results. So this hypothesis wasn't really supported, and that kind of left us scratching our heads a little bit because we would have expected that. But it may suggest that the implicit methods highlight only the strongest or most ingrained associations, while the explicit allows for broader, possibly more aspirational choices. So while your gut feeling is that lip gloss is sexy, if you were given more time to think about it, you might start thinking that maybe matte lipstick is sexy, or maybe even lip balm could be sexy, right? So people can actually check more boxes when there's no time pressure or fear of getting it wrong. So they are allowed to answer more. So that leaves a bigger question, not just which method shows differences, but which one gives us better guidance for our business decisions, which is really the ultimate goal anyway, right? So this slide compares top-line associations from CATA on the left and implicit on the right, broken down by product type and attribute type. For the CATA, we show statistical significance and absolute frequency of response, leaving out attributes that were selected by less than 50% of participants. And for the implicit, the IET on the right, we highlight the strongest implicit associations where bold words also had high explicit agreement, meaning a lot of the people chose and agreed that it was a match. So they not only reacted fast, but also consciously endorsed the word. And what stands out here is that CATA offers more differentiation, as we said before, while implicit results are flatter, possibly reflecting only the strongest, most automatic associations in the implicit. And this raises an important question. Should we be optimizing for what people say they want or build around what they instinctively connect to? So, some particular examples here you might see for creamy or for confident. So, here you can see that there is some difference where creamy in the IAT is coming out as, it's a functional, and for lip balm, it is coming out as a high association, but it is not listed in the CATA. So, that's definitely a difference. And then confident is an emotional word that's coming out in the implicit, but not necessarily in the CATA for matte lipstick. So it could be that there are some differences there that can be reflected in these different types of cognitive styles. So perhaps CATA is great for finding points of difference among the different products. But if we want to know the core must-have associations, like the matte lipstick absolutely must instill a feeling of confidence, implicit might give us a clear signal on what those must-haves are. So, to kind of overview what we found in our study so far, because we will be diving more into the data, the main communication here is that implicit testing doesn't and shouldn't replace explicit methods. It is revealing a different layer of truth, as you could describe it, because cognitive distinctions are real. Our findings support the idea that explicit methods like CATA and ratings do tap into the reflective conscious processing, while implicit methods from things like the IET capture faster intuitive association. And this aligns with the dual process theories and prior studies that were done, like by Massey. Explicit methods are more differentiating. So CATA and ratings revealed greater product differentiation, particularly for descriptive and functional attributes. This makes them effective for fine-tuning and optimization when the product space is really well defined. But implicit might be able to capture what feels right to consumers. So it could be revealing core, deeply held associations, and maybe even especially the emotional ones that consumers may not entirely be able to verbalize. This can maybe guide early stage screening, positioning, and go no go decisions on products and brands. So the differences do seem to reflect underlying cognitive strategies and not just survey structure, including both types of measures revealing different layers of truth. So you're getting what people say and what they really strongly associate. So our recommendation is really use both, but use them strategically. Use the explicit methods when you want granular differentiation, maybe optimization, and for some reportable claims. Whereas implicit methods, you should probably use it when you want to assess those instinctive fits. explore early stage ideas, and maybe capture what consumers won't or maybe can't clearly and easily articulate. So that brought us to the end. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I will be able to talk to both Richard and Rachel to answer any of your questions. I hope that this has been interesting for you. Please come and check us out when we report the rest of the results as we dive into them for SSP, as well as for Eurosense in 2026.